Meeting. Okay. All right. So, welcome everyone, and I want to thank our two guests today, Stéphane Levesque from the Montreal Symphony and Mark Romatz from the Metropolitan Opera, not only for joining us but for doing it on such short notice. And so, um, I thought it would be a good idea for you all to actually connect with a couple of musicians from uh, two of North America's biggest orchestras and musical organizations to get a first-hand glimpse at what it's been like for them to shut down. I mean, we have all been in this since mid-March when the university gave us basically an afternoon or two to figure out how to live in a new life. And at least though we're still here and I'm working, and I thought it would be very educational for you to hear firsthand about two groups that were shut down as well. And so I've got a couple sort of general questions for both of you, and then we'll go to specifics about how the Met was handling it in New York and the OSM in Montreal. So when did each of you first hear about the shutdown?
We had a meeting with management on March 11th, the last in-person meeting we had. I'm also chairs of the players committee, so I've been in a lot of Zooms and a lot of WhatsApp meetings and things like that. And we knew that the government was going to announce the next day that things, we were going to basically go on pause. So that first meeting was just to have an agreement in principle, sort of a handshake agreement that we're going to work with them, they're going to work with us, and we're going to try and find ways to stay connected as an organization, and this is where Mark's going to tell a slightly different story. But our management has been very active, and the musicians have been very responsive. But yeah, the question was, and the answer is March 11th, the day before everything shut down.
That's exactly the same day that we were shut down. So, Mark, what about you? How did the Met handle this?
Yeah, I played my last show that night, March 11th, and pretty much the stuff was coming through on, the internet that the government was going to put everything on pause. And so we were told the next day that the rest of the week was canceled. Then the next Monday, we got emails saying that the whole house was being furloughed, and we would only be paid through March 31st.
Wow.
So we only had another 2 weeks or so of pay coming in at that point. And then we've been on unemployment since April 1st. So.
And so, typically, for both of you, how does your summer season work? Like, I know that probably the Met does. Don't you do a small season, or do you shut down for the summer?
No, we usually run. The season goes these days through June, because we have a residency basically at Carnegie. The actual opera season ends in May, usually at some point, and then through June we play 3 orchestra concerts at Carnegie. That's been set up, and that's an ongoing thing. But everything that was all canceled as well. This past summer we were actually supposed to do a small chamber opera at BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, at the end of June. Which was extra, and it was a very small orchestra. It was not, I think, maybe 23 people involved, and that was canceled as well. I forget the name of it right now. Breaking the Waves, it was. Missy Mazzoli, Breaking the Waves.
That would seem like one of the perfect sorts of pieces to work back into, at least a larger venue where people can be spaced apart enough. But is there any plan to actually mount that production?
No.
No.
Mm-mm. And we've been told, well, of course, the Met has canceled the entire season at this point.
Right.
But I mean, we're not expected to go back to work until next September. Gelb, the general manager, Peter Gelb, has always made it known that he will not open the house unless he can open it completely.
Uh-huh. Well, that's a good lead to Stéphane, the difference that Montreal is doing right now. Like, haven't you started kind of a hybrid return?
So we had. So as of right around Easter, we heard first from the city of Montreal that they were going to allow, socially distanced up to a certain number. I think it was 250. And then literally a day later, the state government here said, no, nothing until August 31st. And so they changed a few of those rules. So now we could actually get together to record, what you've seen. A lot of you have seen probably concerts from a hall with no public or whatever. So we started doing a bit of that. And then we were allowed as of September to have 250 people in the hall. And that was going great. We had 1 week of concerts, 4 different programs. We split the orchestra in 2. So that was really, really great. We did a lot of Mozart and Beethoven the first week. And they recorded them for broadcast, some on Medici.tv and some through our own Facebook. Some of them were paying. And then 2 weeks later, we had programs, 3 concerts with Susanna Malki. And we heard, I think it was on September 28th, that as of October 1st, no more public gatherings. So we did the first concert, which was not my half of the orchestra, with 250 people in the hall. And then the next 2 days, my concerts we did without public. And what that has meant is that the orchestra has had to reinvent, come up with a new season again. They're going to go digital. The good news is our management and the board had agreed to a budget where we were going to go like this more or less for the rest of the season. They if you pay the musicians, we're paid at 70% of our pay right now, and we work. Basically, the plan was 1 week every 3 weeks. So basically play and then go on sabbatical for 2 weeks and play and that kind of stuff. But now that we've been shut back down, we can't have public in there. They're changing the program. And then we found out, actually, you guys, you're not supposed to know. So we've got concerts next week, but I can't tell you where we're playing. It's really hard for me. There might be a Ravel piece with piano in it. So yeah, and the thing is what's been hard for us is we're in Montreal. We got 1 foot in North America and 1 foot in Europe. So we're looking at the way things are happening in Europe, where, like in France, for instance, in the big cities, they're having a shutdown, like a curfew starting at 9 p.m. So what the concert halls are doing, they're playing their concerts earlier in the day so they can have 250 or 500 people go to concerts, because there haven't been any outbreaks as a result of people going to see a concert. Because people that go to concerts don't hang out and get, too close or whatever. They sit in their chair and they take off their masks if they feel comfortable. So we're waiting to hear. I've been saying to people, and it's funny coming from me, who's chairman of the Players Committee, and it's, Mark was in the Montreal Symphony when the relationship with management was not as good. It was, nowhere near what's going on with you guys at the Met, but I have a lot of sympathy for these people in the office, because since March 11, they've had to redo the programming. I say, like, we're now on scenario Q in the second alphabet. Like in some pieces of music where, like, we go to double A and double B and double C. So it's crazy. And it's, when I feel like it's stressful for me, because I might find out only 2-3 weeks in advance what the next program is, well, I think about everything the management's had to do to come up with a program, which will be as much as possible at also the level of the orchestra. Of course, we can hire local people to come and conduct or solo with us, but we can't turn into a regional orchestra at the same time.
Right. So Mark has I sent a few articles out to the studio today just to read a little bit of the background and some current status there in New York. Is there any sort of chamber music going on with the members of the Met Orchestra, or are you guys? I know that you're basically when it was furloughed and then you're unemployed. Are you disallowed by management from performing in smaller groups, or a lot of kind of impromptu stuff is happening with orchestras all around the country, but I don't know if that's happening with the Met because you're in such a different situation. Is there anything happening with the Met Orchestra members that is at least keeping your faces in the public and people aware of your situation?
Yeah, well, we have our own association now, the Met Orchestra Musicians, which is now a 501c3 nonprofit, which at the time that we started going for that status, I was on the orchestra committee here, and it took a lot of work to get that done because there were a lot of twists and turns and things weren't set up right initially, and you have to have a board and this and that and everything. So we have finally gotten that all situated, and there have been some groups getting together, playing, like out in front of Lincoln Center, not on the property. The property's all fenced off, actually, the entire Lincoln Center. So they're maybe playing at the little park right across the street and stuff like that. And that was happening in the summer when it was warmer. It's starting to get cool here now, so I don't know how much longer that kind of stuff's going to happen. But we have they've sent out surveys to find out who's still in town, because a lot of people have moved away, and they are planning to set up a chamber music series, kind of online, that'll be streamed. I don't know too many details. They have talked about a few of the programs, which would, of course, have some kind of an opera theme. For instance, they were talking about having the winds maybe do the octet of Don Giovanni or Mozart, Figaro or something, So, but that actually hasn't happened yet. But we're trying to, get things online. And in fact, we are not told we can't do that. But when Gelb was told that we might do that, he was a bit surprised, thinking that we didn't have the resources and stuff to do that kind of thing. But
yeah, you mentioned getting in touch with people. I don't know if the members of the studio had seen some of the other New York Times articles over the past few months where several of the Met musicians who are, from outside of the United States have actually left the country and gone back to their home countries because of the sheer expense of living in New York on unemployment. And so that leads me to another question for you, Mark, about the difference between what we think of as, say, the members of the Montreal Symphony as compared to the members of the Met Orchestra. Could you tell the students a little bit about the different structure, that you have more than one set of players because of the sheer number of performances you have in a week, and then you have this whole other structure of formal subs around New York? Tell us a little bit about who actually is in the Met Orchestra.
Yeah, there's the regular members, of which I'm one. There are about 97 regular members, and they are considered full-time, salary, full benefits and everything. And then there is a pool of what they call associate players that are the first call subs. They will always get called first. And they're listed in the programs as associate members. And but management has been trying to phase that whole thing out for many years now. So as people retire from that group, the associates, they're not being replaced necessarily. And so most of the time they're just using what you would call a substitute. and then each section goes through and has an order of names that they'll call if we can't get, because in fact there's only one bassoonist in the associates that's actually considered an associate. He's an older gentleman. I don't want to get too nasty about it. He doesn't really play that well anymore. You know, they only really let him do stage bands if they have to. But he never plays in the pit anymore. So we sort of have to try to work around that a little bit. But when he retires, I don't know what's going to happen, because the one guy that we were using all the time, the last time I talked to him, he was going to move back out to the Midwest, I think. So I don't even know if he's in town anymore either. So we'll have to.
So how do you become an associate or one of these subs? Is this something that you earn just by being a trusted performer while you're in the area and the section members call you, or are there auditions for these associated positions?
They're not auditions anymore. I don't know if there were in the past. There may very well have been an audition, a regular audition for that. But most of these people are established freelancers and have been working for the Met for years and really have made an entire career being a sub at the Met, because under our contract, the regular members are required to play 4 shows a week. And depending on what instrument you play, you could play up to, when I first got there, I've played weeks where I've played all 7 shows, just because of the rep that's going on at the time. And I'm also the contra player. So if there's a contra part in an opera, then I have to play that. And that's usually when they'll bring in a sub. Usually the subs at this point are possibly students of the principals, or they're, maybe just people that we know, that we can trust and know that they're reliable and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But as far as there are no regular auditions for that anymore.
Right. So you see, everybody, that it's not simply a matter of certain finite number of musicians in the pit have been laid off, but this ever expanding web from the Met brings in multiple other musicians in every single section, and then just to get a sense of the scope, you have not just the star singers on stage, but an entire chorus and auxiliary members for the chorus. You have, of course, everyone in the production team, in the staging, in the lighting, in the costumes, and of course in management, in publicity, in the the booths where you buy champagne out in the lobby in between acts, and all of the maintenance crew that keeps the place looking all sparkly like it always does. It's just the scope of this shutdown is so incredible. And then you think of it, that it's just one of the arts institutions in this country that we have lost this year. So, Stéphane, how I don't believe that you have the same extent of an extended sort of musical family there, but how wide a net does the OSM toss in the city? How many other musicians have sort of lost their living this way?
We have our contract calls for 94 musicians and 1 librarian. There's always people that retire or people that change orchestras. So since I've joined the orchestra now 21 years ago, 21, 22, we have never had a full complement, because there was a time we didn't have a music director, so you can't have auditions. Well, now maybe we can. We'll have an amendment to our contract, so we can, a bit like some other orchestras, at least for section positions, we could hire without a music director. But currently, I believe there are 81 members of the orchestra, and we have 5 people that are permanent subs. For instance, there were 2 people in the flute section that we haven't been able to fill the positions for a long time, and then the music director decided the subs that we had full-time were really good, so let's fill in the viola section, which always proves to be impossible. But then beyond that, at the beginning of the pandemic, there were musicians hired by our personnel manager all the way until the end of May. So, and what we did is the musicians, the full-time members of the orchestra, every paycheck we had, we made voluntary donations, and we're able to help about, I think, 30 or 40 musicians who were supposed to play with us, small symbolic amounts, but I think people who were supposed to play with us who didn't got about 30% of what they should have gotten, and it came totally voluntarily from the musicians. There are other funds that are union related or are AFM local, or also just arts relief organization, things like that. But so it's nowhere near as big as what happens at the Met. Our management has about 40 people full-time, plus then a bunch of part-time people like in the call centers and ushers and things like that, people like that. So I know that they had to let go some people at the very start of the shutdown. And now that we're back to playing, most of the management staff that was laid off temporarily has been back. And they also took a pay cut, although not 30% like we did. But they work, right now they're working, some of them are in Zoom meetings all day, and they've adapted. Some people say they will never see a computer the same way, just because everything some of them are dealing with, conductors and soloists or their agents anywhere in the world. So some people have to have 4 a.m. meetings because it's 10 o'clock in Paris, things like that.
And you mentioned quickly a point before when you're talking about having been back for a little while, the subscription that you were putting things online. So how are people responding to that? Are they stepping up and actually paying, or do you have kind of a firewall that in order to see these you have to pay? I mean, this is a new thing for a generation of musicians who've grown up thinking that recordings only exist on YouTube, or that they're all free anyway, no matter what the expense of creating those recordings are. And I know that Met is doing broadcasts of archives. So how are both organizations doing with that? It's a fraction of, a tiny, tiny, minuscule fraction of the revenue that you would typically have. But do you find that audiences are stepping up and supporting you online, or is it hard to generate excitement that way?
Mark?
No, well, when we've had the few meetings that we've had with the general manager, he has said that subscriptions for the nightly streams has gone up. People are donating to that and stuff. But you can see those for free. They have recently started a new chamber or a new recital series with the big singers from around the world, wherever they are. And those are being produced by the Met. It's a big point of controversy because a few of those recitals have used musicians from Europe rather than using any of the musicians from the Met. And so we're in a bit of I guess a grievance with them at this point for not using any of us at all. But Gelb has always said that if he can't pay everybody in the house, he's not going to pay anybody. So that's his stance at this point.
That's a nice excuse to not pay.
Yeah. But I do know I've seen another orchestra. I don't know if it's St. Luke's or maybe it's Orpheus, and they're doing a bit of streaming on their own. And when you can go on and you can watch it for free, but if you can pay something, they have different categories, even down to $1, if that's all like students, if that's all they can afford. You can say, yes, I'll pay $1 for this streaming. But well, there's innovations going on out there. The Met just doesn't seem to want to have anything to do with that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, it's a Herculean sized organization that, but still, you've got so many amazing creative people involved with it that at least, the very least of having your musicians collaborate with these singers would be step number one, I think. But
right.
So, Steph, how about Montreal?
Yeah. So from from the start of the summer, we're lucky we have a lot of archival stuff, which usually has I don't know, before a certain year, a 5-year term that they can use it. And basically, since two agreements ago, now they have a 10-year window to use the stuff. And then they can always ask us, especially in this climate, well, we have something from 12 years ago, could we use it without paying the media fee again? So they used a lot of stuff. What happened is they saw that in the beginning, people were really excited because it was for free. And they had, numbers that were pretty good. Like maybe in the course of, they make a concert available for a week. And in the course of that week, 2,000 people would go and look at it, which is one full hall for us. And then, but of course, it's exciting at first. And then people realize that everybody else is doing it. So one day they go, oh, I'll go check out, whatever, Philadelphia Orchestra put on something or things like that. And so the numbers started to go down. So that was when management wanted to look at new content. So we did some new stuff, a couple of orchestra pieces, and also Dvorak's Serenade, which is probably the most commonly played piece since the start of the pandemic, at least for everybody is doing it. And then for this fall, they looked at, they have a partnership with a local production company. And so it's funny, I actually asked someone in management that question recently. And I think that we've had 7 concerts this fall that went online. 2 of them were free. They went through Medici, but I don't know how long they stay on. And the other 5, were a donation based. You could buy a subscription for as little as the equivalent of $10 per concert. So $50 for 5 concerts. And they sold, I think, about 3,000 tickets that way, which is not a whole lot, and doesn't make up. It's probably going to mean that the production costs are covered by those ticket sales. So this has been really hard, and because there's so much that's being offered out there, although what we're seeing and what the comments are from the public is that they really love, whether there's public or not in the hall, they love seeing something that is live, something that's new content, not just a concert that we did on tour in Paris 4 years ago, which is cool in itself, and it's cool for us to go and look at it again. But yeah.
So both of you at some point mentioned the involvement of the union. Has the musicians union been of any financial assistance to you? I know that I'm sure they've been involved in the various negotiations that you've had to go through, but when something like this happens, is the union equipped to come to your aid in any way financially?
They haven't necessarily for us. I mean, it's not like this is a strike. It's a totally different situation. And in that case, the union does have a strike fund that we used in Montreal, in fact. And but in this case, no, there was no kind of emergency or anything, emergency relief fund or anything. There are other agencies around, arts agencies like the Actors Fund and stuff like that you can apply for a grant to get some extra aid, but it's not like you can just go and say, look, I lost my job, I need some money. But you have to apply for grants all the time.
We have a fund like that through the local, the Montreal branch of the union, but it doesn't have that much money in it, and it's usually for people that end up with things they weren't planned or preparing for, usually more like medical things or things like that. But yeah, the union has been advocating for us, and in Quebec, and in Canada in general, but again, we're a hybrid between the European model where taxes pay for everything, and then the US, the National Endowment for the Arts might give $500,000 to the New York Phil, which is kind of, again, a little bit silly, but we've got a little bit of both. So then that's how our union can go to the politicians and say, like, listen, like, it's one thing when we had 250 people in the hall and things like that, but now could we get some help for ticket revenue losses? And then hopefully that goes into the pockets of musicians, especially not in Montreal Symphony, but more like some of the subs or regional orchestras that may have a program every month. So, but they're not financially they can't really do much more than advocate for us, either with our managements or with government agencies.
Yeah. I mean, some orchestras in the United States, of course, got some of the federal money, the PPP or whatever it was called, but that was only for companies that had less than 500 employees, which of course the Met was not at all eligible for, because we have so many more. There are 17 different unions at the Met at this point. So
Wow.
they didn't get any kind of financial assistance from the government whatsoever.
Yeah. Okay, so let's let's change the subject to something that the students have all been involved with. The two dogs are, hey, you boys, calm down, chewing each other. We've all been coming back to concerts in some way or another with, stage. I mean, the other night, seeing the Schubert Octet being played with 8 to 10, 12 feet between each person. Stéphane, since you did more concerts on stage already, what have your guidelines been there in your hall? And do you think that they've been working? Have they been adequate? Have there been problems among the players not feeling safe? How's it been going for that?
Again, it was one of the first things that we discussed with management, on March 11th. We said, if we can do things, if we can do projects, we also need an understanding that you won't force us to come in if we're not comfortable for whatever reason, because of age, or because of underlying health conditions, or because I just don't want to go out in the world because of this pandemic. And they've been good with that. So it means a few people have had to work a little bit more, but not too many people took it as sort of free time off. And our guidelines follow the government recommendations, which are the same as pretty much everywhere. We're not overly concerned. Our hall, or the other things we've done, were outside. Our hall is not even 10 years old. Ventilation is more than adequate. So we're all 6 feet apart. Usually the brass row is a little bit farther, just because we like it that way, but not for any evidence. That's going on the record. No.
Yeah.
But we have said, we have to follow the basic guidelines. So we're not one of the orchestras that you'll see playing with plexiglass, shields, big ones. Some of us have them behind us, but still more for sound than anything else. But yeah, and some people, have asked others, like, no one's come in with a gigantic ruler to say, like, this is not, 2 meters is actually 6.5 feet as opposed to 6 feet or whatever. So it's been okay. Common sense works a lot here. I wish that we had access to testing, or that management could get testing, and we could do more, but they don't require it for work. We have to have our temperature taken when we come in. They have a really fancy sort of iPad-looking thing that you put your face in the hole, and it's magic. Other than that, the understanding, the personnel manager has the list of everyone who's going to be on stage. We don't have. When I go teach at McGill University, I have to fill out every day I go in to teach a self-assessment form online. We don't have that for the orchestra, but the understanding is, if you have a fever or any symptoms, you call the personnel manager and you don't come in. And so far, there have been nothing in the orchestra. There's been one case in management about a week before we were supposed to work, and that person was only in the office, not in contact with any of the people from the office that come to the hall. So, it's been okay. And like I said, I really, and anyone that proposes that we can go back to work, and if it means plexi or no plexi, we should have the confidence to tell management, yeah, I'm okay with this, or I'm not, and management should be listening to us, which I'm lucky here they have.
And you mentioned being 2 meters or just over 6 feet apart. We are, winds and brass have to be 12 feet apart according to our university regulations, which is why it's become such a problem with chamber music and limiting the number of people on stage. So, any any hints to all of these bassoonists about how to keep up your skillful ensemble instincts? And I told them all that they're going to be the generation that cues better in wind quintets than any other before them. But what?
At McGill, they're just as cautious and even more. We haven't had any ensembles at all. Even though I can teach in person, the room has to be a certain size and things like that. But because students have the option to not come in from out of town, they felt, at least for the fall semester, they didn't want to have a two-speed or two-tier system. So one of the things that hasn't changed for me, and I always use that analogy, my distance relative to the concertmaster is about the same. It's the number of people in between me and the concertmaster that's a little bit different. So if I have to listen to him or look at him for cues and things like that, like I would in a Haydn symphony or a Beethoven 6, little calls in the first movement between the violins and the bassoon, things like that, that really hasn't changed. I think it's a lot more it's more different when we did the Dvorak Serenade. Yeah, that was a little bit strange because, between, you have a little army of double bass. We didn't have Contra, he didn't come in, but double bass, cello, bassoon 2 and bassoon 1, which are usually a tight unit. But now, because we were able with an angle, I think that the bassist was about 20 feet away from me, and then the cellist was 12 feet and bassoon 2 was 6 feet. So that took a little bit of, you have, instead of relying on visual, you use your ears, but also there was a bit of antenna going on because you're hoping that people are listening and playing together on purpose and not the other way around. Sometimes in orchestra, people may or may not be listening. I don't know why, but for this, and knowing that it was going to go online, people were very good. You kind of have to, get out of your comfort zone and imagine the wind quintet now takes about the same space as a wind octet would probably, like if you were to play a wind octet in a semicircle. So it's tricky, but yeah, you'll be really good. And if you don't think you have to cue, do cue. If you don't think that bopping your bell around might help people because you know what's going on, it does help. I helped the horns behind me in the Dvorak in the slow movement when I wasn't really playing. I wasn't being obnoxious about it, but like a little sort of gentle bob was helpful. So, and also you're going to be really good at this, and hopefully by the spring we'll be back to playing normally. This is not the new normal. This is the Twilight Zone a little bit. It's like a Star Trek episode where it's almost the same reality. So, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that the fact that you're still the same distance from the concertmaster, and that's a good thing for everybody to remember, is that while you're on the stage at Hill, I mean, you can imagine the same attention that you would have playing something with the double basses as you would playing with that other chamber partner who is now that far away from you. So it's not that big of a stretch. I'm just wondering, since I haven't yet played on the stage, if that lack of numbers between you is sort of is compounding the whole act of trying to be together. You know what I'm saying? That
I actually meant to address that, and then I got sidetracked, as we always do in Zoom meetings. But for winds and brass, I don't think it's as big a deal as we think it is, because we're always playing one part. It's the string players are talking about this. They hear themselves a whole lot more, but they're always playing with someone else. I mean, in orchestra, rarely do string players, unless you're doing Strauss Metamorphosis and things like that. So, but for the winds, it's, in fact, sometimes I kind of feel like it's almost better depending on the pieces, because I hear myself more clearly and I hear others more clearly. It's not as compact, but for strings, it would be, especially in orchestra, kind of a, they're not used to being alone on one stand. Some of them are, they're weirded out by having to turn pages.
So just a pause here. Any questions yet so far from everyone in the studio? You've been paying great attention, but I haven't seen any hands raised yet or any chat questions. Anything so far? Stefan has to leave at 5:30, so if you think of anything particularly for Montreal, we have to do it in the next next few minutes. So speaking of that, of teaching, have both of you you were mentioning, Stefan, that you're teaching in person at McGill. Mark, I don't know, do you have a roster of students as well?
No, but I've just been asked to participate in what the Met Orchestra musicians have gotten themselves involved in, something called Lesson Face, which is a series of master classes. The bassoon class will be in January, apparently. So this will be my first experience to actually teach online. So I haven't done it yet.
So that's a strange lesson face.
Lesson Face. I don't know where the name comes from. Lesson Face.
Sounds like something a student would call a teacher. Oh, Mr. Lesson Face.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're also in the pandemic. We faced a lot of the we witnessed a lot of the racial unrest over the summer, and part of the reply as far as music students have been are concerned was there was a call to revamp the canon, as it's called, and expand repertoire outside of the regular repertoire that we teach, both in etudes and in solo stuff. We're doing a project here that does that, but I just wondered if in McGill if there was a similar call for that, because I know that Canada already has a program where a certain percentage of Canadian composers must be represented in the programs, and but I just wondered if there was a similar kind of call for an expansion of repertoire to respond to the rest of what's been going on in 2020.
Yes, the university and the School of Music have come out with statements. I'm not in a lot of meetings because I am but an associate prof, so assistant prof, sorry. So I'm not full time in any means, but I know that it's been discussed both in terms of the awareness for guests, master classes, lectures, things like that, and programming. For us, there's also a lot of what we call First Nations, Indigenous composers, or people that might come from these communities and then go into the sort of white old composers, study with the regular faculties and things like that. So there is an awareness. We haven't gone as far. We don't have a program as far as what you told me about a couple of weeks ago. And for programming, I don't know what's going on with the ensembles because they've canceled everything. But the awareness is there. There's this kind of joke, like, oh, I'm Canadian, so it doesn't apply to me. It does apply to everybody. And we've had a lot of protests and things surrounding Black Lives Matter here. Nowhere near as dramatic or difficult as what's going on in the U.S. And for that, I feel very lucky in a way to be where I am. But yeah, we have even in the orchestra we have a newly formed diversity inclusion community committee, which has met a few times over the summer. And of course, now with programming changing pretty much every time the pandemic throws another curveball at us, it's been very difficult.
Yeah. And Mark, one of the articles I forwarded to the studio today was speaking about the plans that the Met has for the eventual next season. Have you had a chance to work on any of those? I know that there are several operas listed as being, the first of their kind as far as representing certain composer groups. Has the Met had a similar call that they've responded to with repertoire, or it's another one of those things with such an institution with a history of going back centuries that people have this odd thing where they want to go and see the same opera over and over, while it's different from, say, a movie theater where you want to see the latest. What are some of the most exciting kind of new operas that you've been involved with over these past couple of years?
Actually, there hasn't been a huge move on that on the Met's part in the past. Now, this past season we did Porgy and Bess, and it was so popular that they added 3 to 4, 3, 4, maybe even 5 extra shows for that run. The new, like you said, the new season is starting with a new opera by a Black composer, Fire in My Bones or something, I believe it's called. And he claims, I haven't seen the new season yet. I only have heard about certain things, but yeah, there's been a lot of call, and there was a lot of controversy in the past years because, you have, Aida has always been a very popular opera at the Met because of it's so grandiose and, so many people on stage during the triumphal march scene and all this stuff. And, he was constantly bringing in these white sopranos to play, or sopranos to play Aida, And there was a big uproar when he was going to use Anna Netrebko as Aida. So this was coming not just since the pandemic and not just this year. There have been controversies on this for a number of years now, actually. So hopefully they will get their act together. They came out with a statement, the Met did, after the Met Orchestra came out with its statement on diversity and stuff. So yeah, it's been a problem there.
Yeah, and I know Weston has been very vocal and a great representative for the Met Orchestra in a lot of the diversity summits that I've been a part of recently. And but yeah, that's another aspect of this whole question of changing the repertoire. When you look back at look at the Verdi's Otello, how many lead singers wore blackface to sing that role? And, and that's just one opera out of hundreds, but the idea of it being sung somehow made it okay for the completely wrong, for these errors in casting that people didn't even ask about, because it's opera. This is what we do. So
yeah. And they used, they darkened her face when she sang Aida, and they've darkened tenors' faces when they sing Otello. So, I think there's going to be a stop to that. There are plenty of good, very talented Black singers that they've used, but they're usually in minor roles. Although we've had Black mimes. There's this great soprano from South Africa, Priti Yenda. She's been getting a lot of time on the stage these days in major roles. So that's a good thing to see. And she's great. She's amazing. And then there's Angel Blue has been coming up a lot lately. She's been singing, she's done bohèmes and things like that. So they are starting to use the Black singers more, but we'll see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just unusual that some of the greatest names in vocal history, Jesse Norman. I mean, now I'm blanking on all of the names.
Leontine Price.
Leontine Price and
Shirley Barrett. Yeah.
exactly
Barbara Hendricks.
on that these voices were used to some extent, but in the most natural situations, they either face discrimination of being even hired by the hall, or any number of other issues that stood in their way. And so, okay, I think I see one question in the chat. Marissa, why don't you unmute and pose your question?
Oh, okay, sure. I was just curious, what policies do you hope to see your organization implement once the pandemic is over, in terms of how you would like to see like a better response to like a national or world crisis, or how performance practices will be altered since we've seen so many online performances and virtual events?
First of all, I hope, we've had pandemics, H1N1, SARS, things like that, but one like this, hopefully it is a once in a century event, and we won't be faced with this. It's unthinkable to think that, society as a whole had to shut down uh, to that extent. And then, I'm lucky, I'm getting paid a good portion of my salary to be available and to go do some chamber music and other things, and then some orchestra concerts. But um, I think that supporting the arts on a more grassroots level in terms of funding, especially, so that the idea of shutting down. I mean, the Met is an exception, unfortunately, because, well, like Mark said, 17 unions or something like that. It the the sheer amount of people. But when it comes to orchestras and even the smaller orchestras, I find it really sad that the option to shut down is a better one because it's saving money rather than have the community kind of come up. But it's very different, I think, in the US than in Canada and then in Europe. In Europe, the reason why the Vienna Philharmonic is playing the way they're playing right now is because the arts are a necessity. Culture is not only for the rich people or for the educated people. It's for everybody. Um, I think I don't know if it'll happen in your country, but the way we can finance arts organizations, and from the small ones in the small communities, the small theaters, all the way up to the big orchestras, I think there's room for improvement, um, so that we can cope with um, things like this. Although, like I said, hopefully this doesn't happen again in your lifetime, and then it doesn't, we'll talk about it every 100 years, like 1919, and then 1920, and again in the 2100s. But yeah, there's no way anyone could have been prepared. We all thought the same thing in New York. We all thought, at first the government here closed things down for 2 weeks. We thought, no, maybe in April. And then we thought, well, maybe in the summer. Then we thought maybe in September. And now we're not even sure about January. At least, if a vaccine comes out, how do you, hand it out to enough people so that it's safe to go back? So I think we're all now thinking that normal will be back in September of 2021, which will be a year and a half after this all started. So, I remember, I think, I can't remember which one it was, when in the early 2000s, there was an outbreak of some kind. And I remember going on tour, and we could still travel, we could still play concerts. If you had a fever, you stayed home, but nothing like this.
Yeah, the just so many things have become normalized now, like people not wanting to take cash when you're buying a cup of coffee, or um, not being able to check a student's read to just crow it to see if it's working. I know that's going to be different. It already is different. But even we had to face new protocols of sharing the contrabassoons in between ensembles. And
Oh, yeah,
I haven't even thought about that. Wow.
yeah, I mean, luckily we have three of them, but and we're not putting on any Mahler symphonies, but we had planned to, and so all of that is new, and if anything, what I wonder is, once we do have a vaccine, how long it will take for people to feel safe, like they can trust that everyone else has been vaccinated, and how are we going to manage that transition period where you're still looking suspicious at every person you meet, and um, the transition is as much a mystery as anything else. But I think we have to let Stéphane go, because he could only go till.
I'm actually going to a rehearsal, because we do a concert every year now, the Musicians Association. It's not the Montreal Symphony, but the association. We do a concert for HIV/AIDS long-term care facility, and it's usually a concert that expensive tickets and gala style and stuff. And this year we're doing it online, so we're doing Brahms' German Requiem for string quintet, wind quintet, organ, and then the two soloists and a small choir, and all distanced. And we're going to rehearse today, and then tomorrow we're going to spend the day recording it, so that the same patrons who usually come are going to be able to contribute to that cause. And so I feel really lucky that we can still help as an orchestra association. We can help that Maison du Parc, it's called. But I think, for me, when I talk to my students, and this is just my closing remarks, not that you asked me, Jeff, but I'm going to close. The only, if I'm being really honest, and especially because Zoom has gotten so much better for sound and things like that. Now I can tell if they're putting the resonance key down when I tell them not to, or whatever. Why are you using the B flat F sharp fingering? So we can keep on sharing, and the only hard thing, it's silly, but it's been reeds. And even that, I'm starting to wonder, like, can I have like a station where hand sanitizer, dip the reed, try the reed, dip, but that's going to take a lot of time. So this is, in a way, it's your responsibility, guys. Like, you have to get good at making reeds now, because there's no other choice. And it's really silly. It's been the one thing that I've been telling my students. And if that means that you have to try different profiles, and I saw, the collection of reed gear, I want to go to Michigan just to try.
That room, yeah.
That room. You guys are so lucky. So if you're allowed to go in there and try 3 different profiles and 15 different shapers or whatever, do it, because you don't have as many things to do. I don't know. At McGill, they don't, because ensembles have been a lot different and everything. So you've got time. Try and look at the time that you have now to do things that maybe you took for granted. And if I'm still fooling around with my profiler and trying different shapes right now, just not out of boredom, because I've got the time, So there is something. Now's a good time to be a geek, to really go and get your geek on as much as possible. So thanks for the invitation, Jeff. Sorry, I got to go.
Well, thank you, and there's no better reason for you to leave than that concert. So good luck to that.
Thanks, you guys. Have fun. Bye, Mark. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, Mark. So if we could just keep you for a little while longer.
Can I ask you a question? How are you dealing with the contrabassoons?
Well, students, how many of you have been assigned contra recently? So Ryan, why don't you tell us about what you've done?
So basically with the contras, so since we have 3, I know Bryce and I were both on contra for orchestra cycle, so we kind of reached out to each other and like, okay, we use this one or we use that one, and then we have an agreement that we always swap every time and everything like that. And then if we do have to use the same contra, we make sure we like split vocals and everything, but just try and make everything sanitary and make sure like none of us like use anything after each other.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mark, we before the term started, besides the 3 contras, we have 4 vocals among them. So I was suggesting that if at any, I had no idea from the orchestra conductors what the repertoire was going to be and how many works with contra there were going to be. From the 2 bands, I had a better idea about what was needed, but it was the fact that the ensemble concerts obviously don't line up. We can't have everyone playing on the same night. It's a little bit of juggling, but I think, as Ryan just described, if you're in the same ensemble and you're using 2 different instruments, that's one way to do it, or to keep the, everybody has to have their own swabs, obviously, and also I've got up in the studio 10 jars of Rieger Clean and a big jar of Sтерasol for any kind of special cleaning that's necessary. But the idea that we are leaving contras in a rehearsal hall that's, you know, to just be picked up by the next player, that's a thing of the past now. So
No, yeah, that's got to be difficult, I would think.
yeah. And then Aaron, you were also, so Bryce, you were using one, and Aaron, you were using another one to basically learn the contra. Have there been other issues that I haven't heard about yet with the contra? Anybody not been able to find one when necessary, or no one's come to me with any complaints yet? Okay. All right. So while we have Mark here, what about other questions about contra playing? You know, master classes usually are about playing, and they agreed to come on and talk about just getting on in life with this new situation. But do any of you have questions that you'd like to ask Mark, either about his trajectory to the Met, you know, how he learned? We spoke a lot about that with Juan Degomar when we had our first online studio class guest. Anyone got questions as far as just the nuts and bolts of becoming a contrabassoonist for Mark? Bryce.
Hey there, Mark. Thank you so much for talking with us. Am I a little quiet, or can y'all hear me?
Nope.
I can hear you.
Wonderful. I've got a quick question about the timeline of becoming a contrabassoonist, and at what point I assume you own your own instrument, but at what point did you decide that was a decision that you had to make? And how do you know that you're ready to go and drop 3 cars worth of money on a piece of wood and metal?
Yeah, I love to tell the story about how I started, and it was when I was at school at Michigan, and all of us, I was in symphony band, and there were 4 of us, and all of a sudden a contra folder showed up on a stand. So we went up to see Cooper at the time, our teacher, and we said, who should do this? And and there were 2 guys and 2 girls in the section. And Cooper said, well, the first thing, I don't think the girls should have to carry those things around, you know, so you guys flip a coin. And actually, I was in what was called Winds B at the time. So I was going for a wind degree, so I had to play all the instruments. And I thought, well, you know, of course I would play contrabassoon. I had no problems with that. But then once I left Michigan, my first job, I was a principal player. And then I ended up being second player with Jeff in Savannah, and then subsequently in Jacksonville. And it was in Jacksonville that a friend of mine called up and said he needed some money fast. And he had this new contra, it was a Fox contra that he'd had for maybe 3 years, barely played on it. And he was at the time willing to let it go. I think he paid $8,000 for it new. This would have been back in the early 90s. And he was willing to let it go for $4,500. So I said, sure, I'll buy it. I had some money at that point. And then, of course, the personnel manager in Jacksonville found out that I had this contra, and she started coming up to me and saying, could you play contra on this concert? Because it's easier for me to find a bassoon sub than a contra sub, you know. So I started playing there, basically. But, you know, I had very little experience on it in Michigan other than playing in band and on a couple occasions in the orchestra. And then in 95 was I got a gig with the Colorado Music Festival as third in contra. And I got compliments on it, on my playing, like, you play so well in tune, and this and that. And I thought, my God, intonation, that's the worst thing that, you know, I have to deal with. But then that fall was the audition for the Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic. And I decided to try for it. And then that summer, that August, I had nothing to do. I was just at home, and I just started working on the contrabassoon. I played Milday scale and chord studies, slowly, of course. On the contra, it's not that easy, and just started really learning the excerpts. And I was very successful in that audition. Then I ended up getting the Montreal job in 2000, not thinking I was going to win it at all. And I think maybe that was a big deal, because when you don't think you're going to get it, I just wanted to go and see if I, even had a chance or what I sounded like against other contra players, because pretty much I never had a lesson with anybody. So I didn't, I was only going by what I liked to hear in the contra. And and then I ended up getting the Met in 2009, and it was exactly the same thing. I didn't ever expect to win that job, but so.
Cool. Thank you very much. That's
But
very helpful. Yeah, the
if
journey.
you really want to do it, and the thing is, if you get a contra, you're going to get work.
Yeah,
Better
definitely.
than
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Whether you,
You'll get a job somewhere.
someone's going to need you very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's everybody. See, you could be playing contra one day in symphony band, and then you're in the Metropolitan Opera the next day. That's with a lot of work and a lot of preparation. So, any other questions about contra? What about contra reed making? Mark, how would you say the reed making for contra is similar to or different from reed making for the bassoon?
That was an experimental phase for me. I thought when I got to Montreal as the contra player in the orchestra, I thought I better learn how to make these things myself, because I was using store-bought reeds at that point from Germany. There was a good reed maker by the name of, I don't remember the first guy's name, but the second, he retired, and then his company was taken over by a guy by the name of Simeon Popoff or something like that. And I was getting those reeds from Germany. Apparently, from what I found out, nobody in Europe makes their own reeds. They're always buying reeds because there's so many reed makers over there and stuff. So what I did was I just started buying Rieger gouged and profiled contra cane, folded it over, looked at the measurements of the reeds that I was playing on, and pretty much went by that. And then, just developed my own style after that, and it seems to work. People seem to like the sound and stuff. So I try to make it sound more like a big bassoon than a big rattly contrabassoon, basically.
Yeah. So you haven't bought a contra gouger yet?
No, I'm still using gouged and profiled Rieger cane. Yeah. And it's gotten better, actually, and it's gotten a little thinner. At first, that profile was quite heavy, and it used to. I remember the first one I tried to cut in. It took me 3 days to even get a crow on the thing. That's how heavy that cane was, and it was like, you kept taking it off and taking it off, taking off wood, and it wasn't like a bassoon reed. You figure you take off that much reed, there's nothing left, or that much wood, there's nothing left. But the contra, but they thinned out their profile quite a bit, so it's much easier these days.
Anyone else with contra aspirations here? Questions for Mark? No. What about hearing Mark's story? Those of you who are good reed makers, go to Europe or
Right.
try to change the culture here. That you can always sell something.
There we go.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a contra player from Sweden call me up one time, and that's how I found out about this. He was on a sabbatical, and he was in the United States, and he was going around to contra players in the big orchestras, and he would say, could I get a lesson from you? And I thought, Jesus, you're in the Swedish radio opera or orchestra or whatever it was, and you want a lesson from me? And I said, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. But really what he wanted to talk about was reeds, and he would take my reeds and he would take measurements. He would use, a dial indicator and all this stuff, and to measure the blades and stuff. And at that point, it was amazing because I don't use a lot of gadgets. I go by feel here and by what I hear. And of course, I go for intonation and stuff. And when he was measuring my reeds, the good ones that I gave him to look at, the measurements were very similar. And it kind of freaked me out, but it's just all about here, just how it feels here and what it sounds like to my ear. And so I said, can I look at one of yours? And he said, well, I don't really make them because nobody makes them over here. Everybody buys reeds and stuff. So I don't know.
Did he tell you his maker?
Yes, but right off the bat, I can't remember who that was.
I just wonder if people are cagey about that. If everybody's buying reeds, do they want to keep that information secret so that they only have that maker? Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know, but if you guys want, you've heard of Simon Van Holen, I'm sure, the contra player from the Concertgebouw. He makes reeds, and I bought some of his. Actually, I have 5 of his, brand new. They're quite nice, actually. You might want to contact him. He's got a Facebook page, and he's got a website somewhere, I think.
He's also on Instagram, and he gets that information out. We get ours from Steve Bronstein in San Francisco.
Oh, you do? Yeah, good.
And he makes really, really fine reeds. So
The first ones I bought were from Peter Grenier in Dallas. He makes reeds on occasion. I mean, I think if you call him up, of course, he's probably close to retirement now these days, I think. And then I was using these German reeds until I started making my own.
So you were mentioning people coming to you for lessons. When you hear students who want to play for you in contra, what are the biggest issues that you think you have to correct or insist on more than any others? Since you mentioned how you wanted it to sound like a big bassoon, and so what are the issues that you think are the most frequently encountered that you have to try to fix for students?
The first thing that came to my mind is just how you hold the instrument. I don't hold it straight up between my legs. A lot of people do play that way, but if you read books, I don't know if this one is in print anymore, but I happened to get early on the Piard contrabassoon book. And he talks about the position where you sit straight up in the chair, you put the end pin near your right foot, and you rest the instrument on your left leg so that it's at an angle similar to how you play the bassoon. And rather than, because for years when I first started playing, I was playing it straight up in front of me and stuff. And of course there's the sight line issue and everything else, but if you have it at an angle, you can somehow find a good angle where you're playing it and it basically feels like you're playing a bassoon, then you don't have the sight issues and stuff like that. The other is mostly breath control and stuff. I find most students don't take big enough breaths, especially when they're thinking about like the big solos, the excerpts and things on contrabassoon. You have to really think about where you're going to breathe and how big a breath you need to take, because of course the contra takes up more air than a regular bassoon and stuff. So I think it's very important to think about breathing and just filling up the horn.
So we, when Juan gave his class in March, he recorded a few excerpts for us and talked about some of the difficulties. What would you say are some of the most challenging contra excerpts that that you would have to nail in order to win a job like yours?
Well, for opera or just orchestra in general?
Well, for orchestra in general.
Schoenberg Chamber Symphony, I think. It always is on the auditions, and they always ask it, and it goes up like to a high B flat or something, I think, at one point, and there's a very fast run that they always ask for. And then of course, I thought about this the other day because I thought if this question came up, there's a very little known piece, Glier's Third Symphony. Jeff, do you know this?
Oh, Ilya Muromets.
Yeah. Second movement. It's got a huge contrapart, and it actually only showed up for me on an audition one time, which was for Pittsburgh. But then when I got to Montreal, the second year I was there, it was programmed, so I had to play that thing. And I've seen it show up on several auditions since then. So, you know, and it's pretty big. It's a big solo part, actually.
Now,
And, you know, the Ravel left hand and Mother Goose and any Strauss. Well, Strauss mostly you're going to get Salome, always Salome, even in an orchestra audition. Sometimes they want to hear Electra as well. A lot of the big stuff the best contraparts I've been coming up against have been in opera these days. Like Shostakovich, the nose, the contrapart's amazing in that. And the new stuff, Thomas Otis, it's very difficult. It's like he took the string bass part and just placed it right in front of you, and you gotta play with them all the time. And of course, there's a lot of breathing that you gotta think about, because those bass parts, they don't have to breathe. So the music goes on and on and on.
well, yeah, and always encountering that with you know, the Beethoven symphonies, Beethoven 9 and 5, and then the Missa Solemnis parts. They are all string bass parts. So
Right.
ways it might help someone preparing a contra audition to actually get a friend of theirs from the bass section and play those things together, just to make sure that you're all approaching it the same way. And I'm sure whoever the bass member of the orchestra committee would appreciate that kind of work as well. So
I do know one of the comments that I have always heard from other musicians who sit on contrabassoon auditions, what they want to hear, is with the last sort of scale that goes up at the end of the first solo. If that's anywhere near in tune, then they pass somebody, they say. So really think about intonation on slow passages, especially, because they're going to listen to it and they can hear it, actually.
right.
So, but then of course, even if you have a great contrabassoon, you know, notes are still out of tune. I have 2 fast models now, and Fox and they have their own problems. You know, there's still notes that aren't great, and you know, but they do make things much easier, I have to say. Although, what are the contras at Michigan? Are they Foxes?
They're all 3 Foxes, but none of them are the fast system.
Okay.
Why don't you, since some of the students may have heard of that but haven't actually tried one yet, tell us what the Arlen Fast system is on the Fox instrument.
Well, he went through, and I think he was basically deciding he needed an instrument that was going to make his life in an orchestra much easier. And so he would go through each big contra excerpt meticulously and say, what would make this easier for me? Well, maybe a C-sharp key here with the little finger. So there are a lot of extra keys. They're all sort of, you can order them separately or not get them at all, but the ones that he recommends, because if you order a fast contra through him, he will give you a sheet and you can, you know, go through it, and he'll recommend stuff, and he'll say, oh, this is, yeah, you know. So but it makes things much easier. He's redesigned especially the tenor joint, which is the metal part of where the receiving end of for the vocal. And I think he's repositioned some of those octave tone holes and things. So pitch is much easier, especially in the upper register. It's much easier to play. And you can play very high. You can play the Rite of Spring high C on these contras. It's crazy. I mean, nobody writes up there yet, but if you have to do it, you can do it.
How high did Kalevi Aho write in his concerto? I know that.
That I've never even seen that thing. I don't even know. But I think, yeah, that was written for a fast model, I think.
Yeah.
In mind, yeah.
Yeah, everyone, I think the biggest advancement is where he's drilled those, you know, the equivalent of our high, our A, C sharp, and or high C and high D keys are not drilled in the best acoustical place in the typical contra. and the fast system puts them in a better acoustical spot, and so the high register is much more reliable, and it only encourages composers to go even higher. So
Yeah. Yeah.
they wouldn't do that.
I think Shostakovich, the nose goes up to a high B flat at 1.2, but that's easier than, let's say, the Schoenberg Chamber Symphony. That's a very fast passage where you go up that high. So, but I did it on a regular Contra. It's possible on a regular Contra. You just have to, practice it and stuff. So.
Yeah, well, Mother Goose also goes to B flat, doesn't it?
But yeah, that's very easy actually.
And then
And then there's Brahms 3, that whole last movement thing that's kind of crazy. That's very easy on a fast Contra these days. So
and, I think the highest I ever had to play was the John Adams Chamber Symphony, where they have the high D.
yeah, I've never played that actually.
Oh yeah, that high D. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else got a Contra related question for Mark? No? Good. Well, Mark, thank you so much for staying on longer to talk these issues through, and we are all so sorry that the Met is down. We're waiting for everyone to get back up and playing again, and hope that there's some relief package coming from the government soon that will help.
The next big thing I'm waiting for is just get this election over with, and then we'll see what happens. So
Yes. So,
but thanks for having me on. It's great to see all these enthusiastic bassoonists and everything, and good luck with your year. Are you teaching almost online or always, or what?
of the 16 students, 14 are in person and 2 are online, and we still haven't gotten formal notification from the president of the university as to what, if any, changes are happening in the next term. I had to fill out a survey today about faculty, responses and issues. So
Okay.
I wish they'd make some announcement soon, but
Yeah.
we're 12 feet apart in the studio. I know Patrick Swayze said nobody puts baby in a corner, but I put each of my kids in a corner. More or less. So, anyway, thanks again, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And so everybody else, have a good night, and see you at the next lesson.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.